everyone. Let's get started since it seems like we've all had a chance to grab food. So today it's my pleasure to introduce Hank Lee, who is a PhD student here in the HCII. Hank works with Professor Sylvik Das and Jody Ferlizzi on different topics in usable privacy and security and human-centered AI. So I'm really looking forward to his work related to privacy in the age of AI. Those of you who just came from my last class, we were just talking about privacy risks in AI. So this is very kind of a timely topic related to that. And part of the struggle in this space is we don't actually have good tools and ways to help practitioners do this in practice, and that's what Hank's work focuses on. So I'll pass it off.
Thank you. Really nice introduction. Thanks a lot. And yeah, it's great to be here. And thanks again for inviting me to give this talk. So I think I hear myself. Is that?
Sorry, that might be my computer.
How about now?
Yeah.
Perfect. Cool. All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Hank Lee. I'm a PhD student in Human Content Interaction Institute here at Carnegie Mellon University. So my research interests lie in the intersections of human-computer interaction, or HCI, and privacy security, obviously, and human-centered AI. So what that really means is that I study and build technology interventions and try to advocate for end-user privacy in AI technologies. So today I'll be presenting some of my PhD work in helping practitioners who are building AI products and services to do privacy work. So we're now in the era where artificial intelligence is part of our everyday products and services, right? So for example, we use facial recognition to authenticate into our phones, or we use a language model to generate text or support document writing, or we use the vision-based algorithm to create images and art, right? And obviously, that with AI increasing shaping the consumer product landscape, there's a growing need to streamline and accelerate the development of new AI product and services or solutions. And in HCI, the recent work in AI asset design materials, sort of looking into ways to systematically support practitioners in using AI to new product ideas, which is probably not surprising. Indeed, these shiny new AI technologies make the world very exciting, creating new products and technology opportunities as well. But there's a flip side, right? New privacy risk introduced by these AI products. So with facial recognition, a random third party can get access to the ability to match your profile to match your photos to your online presence. Right? An example of this is that in 2020, a journalist published an article describing a company called Clearview AI, and that purports that they help U.S. law enforcement to match the photos of individuals or people to their online presence through a facial recognition model trained on scraping millions of publicly available face images online. And then there are police departments across the nations, and the different U.S. cities that reported to actually use this type of AI technologies, which is definitely concerning. And when training large language model, it can be very challenging to ensure that every data points that the model is trained on all receive users' consent. Okay. In 2022, actually, a person found that the photos of her private medical records were included without her knowledge or consent in a photo database called Lion, which had been removed, thankfully. But when the incident happened, it has been used to train a lot of popular text-to-image models like Stable Diffusion or Google's Imagine. And with the capability of diffusion-based algorithm, then everyone can create realistic fake photos or videos using others' identity that humans have difficulty discerning as fake, right, essentially. And that's why we see a lot of incidents where there are fake pornography or even online scams using celebrities' photos or videos. And of course, there are many examples like this, right? And many of us probably seen and some privacy incidents caused by AI products on social media or news. And that reminds us that without careful considerations, these AI products can then turn into a large and unsupervised surveillance infrastructure that invades our privacy. And given the recent hype around AI, as well as some of the more intense that we have seen, it is perhaps not surprising to see that people are concerned about how AI can affect their privacy. A recent survey on 10,000 people from all over the world found that many people believe that AI would result in less privacy in the future, citing concerns about collections of personal data, consent, or surveillance. But it's worth clarifying that the dialogue about AI and privacy is actually not new. In some way, AI and privacy are bound because many of the privacy risks that we talked about come from the collections and processing of personal data, similar to any other type of technologies that we already have, right? But at the same time, there is also a hype about what AI can and cannot do, making it difficult to separate real risk from the speculated ones. So just take a step back here. Something clear is that the modern advances have really changed the AI's and machine learning's capability. And that is what the whole industry is excited for, right? As well as how we currently train and expect a practitioner in the industry to do in their day-to-day job, like think about ways to incorporate AI to your products. But what is not totally clear right now is how these changes and advances in capabilities and the requirements of AI therein to unlock those capabilities have potentially changed about the landscape of privacy. So the tension between the utility and intrusiveness of AI interests us to take a closer look at how does AI change privacy risk, if at all. Our practitioners who are building these shiny new AI technologies equipped to recognize and mitigate the privacy risk introduced by AI. And also, how can we build tools to help practitioners raise the awareness of privacy risk of the AI product they intend to build? So these are the three main questions I will try to address in this talk. We'll take some question between each sections and we'll take more question at the end. All right, so let's start from the question, if AI indeed changed something about privacy. So to answer this question, we create a taxonomy through a qualitative analysis process. And to keep our process grounded in reality, not speculation, we scope our analysis to cases of privacy harms related to real-world AI privacy incidents. So we source these from a popular public AI incident database called AIAIC. So AIAIC is a curated database of over 1,000 incidents where AI caused some types of harms, right? Either, for example, harms related to privacy, fairness, and transparency. And over 300 of these cases were tagged as being related to privacy at the time we conducted our analysis. And we manually analyzed these cases to see if the privacy risk described in each incident was either exacerbated by, created by, or otherwise not meaningfully changed by AI. Specifically, we rooted our analysis against Soliv's popular taxonomy proposed in 2006, which we use as a baseline to capture privacy concerns entailed by computing more generally before the modern advances of AI. So if Soliv's taxonomy captured the privacy risk described in the incidents in a manner where the capability or requirement of AI played almost no role or very little role, we said it was not meaningfully changed. On the other hand, if the risk described appeared to be different than what was captured by Soliv's taxonomy, we ask, if the risk here fundamentally new in some way, or were the capabilities and requirements of AI exacerbate this risk that we had known about? So very briefly, we identified 12 types of AI privacy risk and found that 93% of the incidents described involve a situation where the capabilities and all the requirements of AI either create or exacerbate the described risks. We also create a website at aiprivacytaxonomy.com to increase the reach of our work, in case you're interested. In this presentation, I will highlight a few of the privacy risks presented here. All right, so let's first talk about the risk that AI exacerbates. So these are risks that have always existed, but that AI can extend in intensity and scale. So first, of course, surveillance, which is always a big concern when we talk about computing technologies that constantly watching, listening to, or recording an individual's activities, right? So surveillance have long existed before AI, but AI exacerbates the risk by incentivizing the collections of ever more data to train and deploy effective models. So there are reports, for example, schools that deploy student management system, safety management systems, to detect and prevent violence and suicide. But what ended up happening is they're simply monitoring students' digital footprints, like their emails, online documents, internet usage, or even your social media accounts. Or reports in which employees' geolocation data from mobile devices were used to assess their performance, really unfortunately. And that also raised concerns about employee tracking even outside of their works. So this example of surveillance of increased scale and ubiquity are incentivized by the promise of AI being able to sift through this data and making sense of it very easily. And second, identification risk. Another well-known privacy risk entailed by AI refers to linking specific data points to an individual's identity. So for example, a picture of your face may now link to your identity by default, but with facial recognition technology, it's easier to do so. So AI technology can automate the identification process, looking across different sources and large scales, often in real time, and even with low quality or obfuscated data. So coming back to this Clearview AI example, facial recognition software that allows police officers to index into your online presence with simply a photo of you, even you're wearing a hat or glasses in the photo, and also in real time. So this example demonstrates how AI can exacerbate the identification risk by its latency and robustness. So AI can also exacerbate insecurity risk, right? Which refers to the carelessness of protecting collected personal data. So AI can exacerbate the insecurity risk beyond simply backdoors in personal data. For example, being hacked, right? Large language model, for example, can memorize training data and reveal sensitive information of an user to other users given a particular problem. For example, a chatbot trained on real-world text conversations was found to expose information like the names and home addresses of the users whose data of which the bot was trained. All right, so now switch gear and talk a bit about the risk that AI creates, right? So we found that AI can create two types of new risk: new instantiation of known category or risk, and also new category risk. So one new instantiation of risk is in distortion category, which refers to disseminating false and misleading information about people. So the one that we typically hear of is misinformation through the fake, which exploits others' identities to generate realistic fake images and audio. So 4chan users, for example, was found to use the fake technologies to create audio of celebrities saying homophobic and racist things that they had never said before. And we also found AI created distortion risks that are actually less egregious. A filmmaker of a documentary used the fake to create scenes of an actor who had passed away for lines they had no recording of. So this example also raised important questions about expectations around privacy in light of how generated AI can and should be used in different use cases. And finally, we found that there are also new category of risk that wasn't well captured by the original Salus taxonomy that AI is enabling: phrenology and physiognomy. So physiognomy is a pseudoscience that purports that one can understand a person's character or personality traits, like their intelligence, likelihood to commit a crime, by simply examining their physical features, like their face or body. And in our data set, we found attempts, for example, to use AI to classify people as gay or straight or whether or not they are criminals based on a picture of their face, right? And besides the problematic use of AI, of course, these also raise privacy concerns where users' sensitive information is being inferred and potentially shared. All right, so this is a quick overview in terms of how we see AI change about privacy. So I'm gonna pause here for a little bit, just in case that anyone have questions or clarification.
So I'm interested in the physiognomy part. Is it a founded inferences that you can draw relations between like the facial features and personalities? Like, is it true or?
It's been debunked by the science community, right? Over the past decades or so. So, yeah, this is actually a good question as well in terms of what's the fundamental differences in terms of the aggregation I just briefly talked about, right? AI a lot of time we're actually using a lot of like aggregation, right? We try to predict what's the user profile in some way. And the fundamental differences between aggregation and physiognomy is that this type of application, at least what we're seeing in the AI incident database, physiognomy a lot of time is actually based on a really ungrounded hypothesis. So we could basically correlate everything inside the machine learning model, right? It's like back in early 2010 where people try to predict whatever they want and just store in data and just makes.
Sorry, would you mind repeating the question for Zoom?
Oh yeah. So the question is, all right, let me synthesize what the question is. So the question should be, I think I got off track. If I forgot could you help me to repeat that question again? Sorry about that.
So the PowerPoint shows that the AI is drawing relationships between the physical features and the personalities in a sense. And my question is there any paper or prior researches that corroborate any kind of relationship between that before, or it's just completely unfounded and AI is drawing fake or false?
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying, reminding me again. So the question is whether the phrenology and physiognomy, and have we seen in the literature whether there are sort of grounded evidence that this type of research is essentially legit. Is that the right framing of that? Yeah. So in my perspective, or at least when we're looking into the incidents, we haven't seen any type of incidents like any evidence like that, right? There's just simply no like evidence that this even makes sense, right? It's just basically simply sort of having the hypothesis that we could throw in anything into AI models and that the output kind of makes sense, right? It's just like, sort of connecting the correlation as causality type of thing, right? Because we see the significance, it means that there are some relationship behind it, but just simply a false claim. And how does that sort of connecting to the privacy risk area here is that essentially they are making some false predictions, but at the same time, something that is really concerning is that they also link to some really sensitive information about people, right? So that sort of broaden out the potential attack surface of what AI could cause in terms of privacy harm to individuals.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned AI in many slides. Is it like a specific kind of AI we're talking about here, or is it like generative AI, or is it like?
Yeah, so we do define AI in the paper in a way that we put it more broadly, right? So there's like how
the question is,
oh,
what do we mean by AI?
Yeah, the question is how do we mean by AI? Yeah, I have to like remind myself. I have to repeat the question. So yeah, so the question is what do we mean by AI here? So there's a specific definition in AIC what we mean by AI, and then use a more broad definition of in terms of algorithmic computing capability of a computing system, right? So like going back to the foundation where we see about machine learning or AI system in some way. But yeah, so in terms of the incidents that at least we go through, one of the characteristics is that they try to make sense or predict certain type of user behavior based on user data, because a lot of incidents being reported in AI AIC is more on the human-facing aspect of that, right? So either they are training based on user data, or they are making predictions or inferences about user data. Does that answer your question?
Would it include something like reinforcement learning, or like robotic kind of AI?
There are some robotics incidents for sure, so typically in AIC they didn't specify what type of techniques I actually use in models, because honestly, a lot of products actually don't reveal that technical details, right? But in terms of domains, there are some robotics incidents as well. For example, there are Roomba being deployed in the home settings, things like that, right? Whoa, yeah.
So over here, we're talking about risk, which come during training process or like data collection and all, and inferences that AI builds while training. My question is, can some more risk be identified if an adversary tries to attack the model and try to get the data, try to reconstruct the training data of the AI model?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is, the privacy risk that we sort of describe in the taxonomy is sort of surrounding the AI system itself, right? And the question is whether there are also risks sort of that there are malicious users trying to attack the system with sort of either sidetracking or some unintended use cases, right? So yeah, in the incident data, so I think that's sort of the nature of our approach is in the way that what have been sort of within that how the AI system sort of impose privacy risk toward the end user, right? But obviously there are some incidents actually where there are some, let's say, hackers, right? They use pretty broad term hacker and hack into the system. So that could be where a lot of those like, for example, efficient machine learning techniques, or even the attack specific toward the infrastructure of AI systems, where they, for example, get permission into the system, or they could actually have sort of the unintended use case. They found some unintended use case about the system, and then that sort of incidents based on those incidents. But what I'm trying to answer here is that the incidents here is sort of based on the end user perspective, right? What have some type of harms already been done, or being harmed to end user in some way, either their data is being leaked, or the model are being used in ways that could intrude people's privacy. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So also just one final note here. So in the taxonomy, we sort of categorize risk into four broad categories about the processing, collection, dissemination, and there's also a physical intrusion as well. So there, in some way, capture how we want to capture in terms of the whole AI product lifecycle. But obviously, the real AI product lifecycle is kind of complicated, right? So we can't really capture every single one. But one of the things that we talked about in the paper as well is that we think there's an opportunity where we could actually extend this taxonomy in the future, either by seeing more incidents coming up, and we sure will see more incidents coming up, right? And how can we either manually or automatically sort of curate those incidents back to the taxonomy and then expand that from there? Yeah. Cool. Then we'll continue then. Right. So hopefully our taxonomy provides some evidence for why we think AI appears to change privacy risk in some way, right? And then the logical next step for us is try to understand our practitioners who work on these AI products and services equipped to recognize and mitigate this risk. And there are reasons to believe that AI technology create new challenges for industry practitioners to think about privacy when building products, besides the unique privacy harms due to its capability that we just talked about. So specifically, prior work suggests that there remains a substantial gap between principles and practice in creating AI technologies that center human needs, societal good, and safety. So here we zoom in specific in the aspect of privacy. So even for well-known resources for designing AI systems, like Apple's Human Interface Guidelines for Machine Learning and Google's Peer Guidebook, it is unclear if they provide enough guidance for practitioners to directly follow through for their privacy work. And the answer is probably no. And also to formally contextualize the barriers that the practitioners face in AI privacy work, we drew from the Security and Privacy Acceptance Framework, or short for the SPAF. So the SPAF survey on what leads to users accepting and rejecting best practices in security and privacy, and summarized that there are three key barriers users must overcome: awareness, motivation, and ability. So we apply the SPAF and take a closer look at whether practitioners have the awareness of the potential privacy risks that their product can entail. And second, the motivation to act on addressing these privacy threats, such as taking actions to mitigate, or at least having a discussion about such a risk in their product team. And finally, the ability to convert privacy intentions into action. Right? So let's say the practitioners identify the risk and decide to act on mitigating the risk. Do they have the ability and the right tool in doing so? So we posed 3 research questions corresponding to each of the SWAF barriers that asked about. First, how well do AI practitioners' definition of privacy work reflect their awareness of AI-exacerbated privacy risk? And second, what motivates and inhibits privacy work for AI products? Finally, what affects practitioners' ability to do AI privacy work for their product? So we interviewed 35 industry AI practitioners with all kinds of roles from different technology companies of different sizes and domains to understand their current approaches to privacy work. And all of our participants have participated in discussion about end user privacy as it pertains to the AI products they built. So what did we find? So first, when defining privacy, practitioners use the language of harm reductions and mitigation. For example, a tech lead talked about his team's approaches to training privacy-respecting machine learning models as not being able to pinpoint behavior to a single origin. Software engineer, on the other hand, stressed the importance of not repurposing the data collected from users other than their initial goals. And another practitioners described the need to ensure the user data be protected in the whole AI product lifecycle. So seeing this, you may wonder, nothing really has changed compared to the practice for non-AI products, right? And indeed, our participants were not really aware of how the capabilities and requirements of AI affect the privacy threats entailed by the products. One example here is that while many of the participants' products involve large language models, which is probably not surprising, none of them mention the memorization issues in LLM, right? The things that we just talked about, which can accidentally reveal sensitive user data of a user to other user. Well, the fact that these foundation models were often trained on massive corpus of textual information scraped from the web or even from their own users and fine-tuned using these data without users' knowledge or even notice, right? So in short, the structure in place for practitioners to think about privacy for products remain generic and not specific to AI. And in terms of motivation, we identified key motivators and inhibitors for AI privacy work. So first is the alignment with business interests. So our participants described a competitive differentiation and client concerns as key motivators for privacy-related design deliberations. For example, a tech lead in an AI startup company see privacy as a differentiator for their products in a really saturated market. And some of them also talked about social responsibility. So, for example, a researcher mentioned a personal desire to build socially responsible AI as their motivations for considering privacy when designing AI products. Specifically, they do not want bad use cases of their machine learning products to be improperly applied in the real world. And finally, many practitioners mentioned complying with external regulations like GDPR as the general motivation to even act on privacy. But we also found many more inhibitors for practitioners' AI privacy work. I'm going to share some of them here. So first is the rigid compliance. So indeed, compliance with privacy regulations can motivate privacy work. However, we also found that compliance-driven approaches to privacy sometimes also prevent practitioners from going beyond minimum requirements. For example, a lead designer discussed experiences where she advocated for privacy in product meetings, but would be met with resistance from coworkers because the product was already compliant, right? And second, practitioners also expressed lack of career incentives to advocate for privacy, or even indirectly misalign with such an incentive. Finally, the opportunity cost. Our participants discussed how privacy work comes with trade-offs that make it difficult to prioritize. For example, the trade-offs and model performance entailed by the privacy work. They point out that the trade-off between the model utility and the privacy are due to the data to which the model have access to, maybe more coarse-grained owing to the privacy compliance, or the fact that the model has access to less data, making training effective models more challenging. So a key upshot of practitioners' motivation for privacy is that the privacy work is most commonly driven by meeting non-AI specific compliance standards. And that practitioners currently face many more inhibitors than motivators for privacy work in developing AI products, and thus have a low overall motivation to engage in privacy work beyond the minimum requirements. From a micro level, practitioners need to trade off model performance and feature utility, which is an actual effort to go beyond the bare minimum, right? And from a macro level, privacy work that going beyond the bare minimum can also harm their promotion or even create tensions with their colleagues. And finally, we want to understand ways that translate practitioners' intention about privacy work into actual actions. So our participants describe using a range of methods, artifacts, and resources in their privacy work for AI products. I'll talk about two more common ones here. So first, it is common that there are some type of company-wide privacy trainings to educate them about privacy. However, such trainings were often generic and not directly useful for developing AI products they are building. They also reference on-demand design documentation and consult the privacy or legal experts when designing for privacy. But this is sort of also under the assumption that the participants will be the front line of these privacy conversation and should be responsible to even initiate those conversations with these folks, right? So overall, we found that practitioners face ability barriers in their privacy work. Specifically, AI systems are complicated, and it's hard for practitioners to think about the privacy issues that could result from the data they collect and process. Also, practitioners often found it challenging to navigate privacy requirements when building the AI products, specifically the ways to make sure that AI products complying with these compliances were often too new for them or for the organization to have some sort of prior experiences to lean on. So in general, practitioners were not well prepared in terms of tools, resources, and support to design for privacy. And instead, they focused mostly on following the compliance rules and had to put in work to understand how those rules apply to their specific products. Right, so now seeing these barriers that practitioners face, how can we do about them, right? So first is to improve practitioners' awareness of AI exacerbated privacy risk. So in our interviews, we found that many practitioners were not aware of the potential risk to privacy that may arise from integrating AI into the products and services. And indeed, nothing all that different about AI in terms of improving awareness inherently. But the context of AI being so rapidly integrated into every type of product necessitates this, right? We're now seeing AI embedded in products like mouse, Roomba, or even toilet, of which people may wonder if AI is necessary in the first place. And in addition, we also may as well concern that the practitioners who are building these AI products should at least have access to the educational materials on privacy that are specific to the AI products. So a potential direction is to create AI-specific training campaigns. Awareness campaigns are commonly used to increase awareness of privacy and security threats more generally, such as those have been implemented during the onboarding and workplace. Similar campaigns can be effective at raising at least a baseline practitioners' awareness of how AI might change the landscape of privacy for their products. So here, I'm gonna piggyback to an AI privacy taxonomy website that we launched to capture privacy risk entailed by the unique capabilities and requirements of AI. So we see this as a potential starting point to create a set AI-specific privacy training campaigns and help practitioners with their privacy work. And second, to improve practitioners' motivation to address AI exacerbated privacy threats. We found that many practitioners felt disengaged from privacy decision-making process and practice when privacy was not uniformly valued by the team. So here we envision an approach via pro-social design processes to motivate practitioners to engage in AI privacy work. Specifically, prior work has shown how developers, security, and privacy practices are socially driven, right? So in our study, we also found that practitioners want resources to learn privacy best practices from others. So we envision a shared repository of best practices for AI privacy work with examples of how product concepts change before and after applying these practices. So such social proof that others also value privacy work could also increase practitioners' motivation as well in some way. And third, we found that our participants were ill-equipped for the privacy work and did not have tools to help mitigate AI-specific privacy threats and risk. And you might wonder, so how about the work in privacy preserving machine learning field, right? So consider common notions, so privacy preserving machine learning for now. Typically, two main things pop up, differential privacy and federated machine learning, right? And there are useful techniques for sure, but based on our findings and the taxonomy and the interview study, they consider some of the processing risk exacerbated by AI, but do not at all consider the data processing dissemination risk that newly created by AI. So I'll give you an example here. Let's say we want to create a differential private algorithm to classify whether or not a person is a criminal based on, let's say, based on the face and in a federated machine learning architecture, right? They are using these privacy preserving machine learning techniques, but it doesn't really eliminate the fundamental premise or the nature of the privacy risk introduced by this AI product idea. So future work should look into AI-specific privacy design assessment and design tools. For example, work in human-centered AI has already begun to explore approaches like checklists or value cards that help practitioners explicitly foreground these principles and values like fairness and transparency into the design of the AI systems. Similar artifacts can be created to help practitioners design for AI-specific privacy threats as well. All right, again, I'm gonna pause here for a little bit, just in case people have questions.
Sorry, there was a question on Zoom. So the student was wondering how can we ensure that privacy safeguards evolve alongside kind of the advancements in AI, especially as we see AI systems become more autonomous.
Right. So I guess the question is about like how can we ensure that long-term guarantee of certain risk doesn't exist? I guess it's a really hard problem, right? I guess it's, at the end of the day, I think there's a couple layers of that. Addressing privacy risk is not new, right? Even before the advances of AI, obviously. And I guess it's probably fair to say that we haven't seen a one-fit-for-all solution and could just guarantee, this privacy would not occur anymore. It's just the nature of the privacy security research that we're doing here. But I guess that the hope here is, as long as there are some sort of research and community-centric around the topic, that and then the customer value being put into that, I think there's a hope where, as we see in the interview study, where the privacy risk or this human-centered privacy could actually become a product deliverables for actually a lot of company, which is actually what we're seeing right now, right? They sort of like putting private user privacy into the centric, or at least in the ethos of the company. So I think there's a hope of that, right? But I think there's definitely need more attention around this topic, right? So that's why we're arguing that at least the first step is not only about the practitioner, that they need to have this kind of awareness, but also the end user as well. Like when you're using this AI products, what type of potential risk that they may encounter. But the reason why we pick practitioner as a starting point is because we think there's a better leverage on that, right? If the person or the people, a group of people that are building this AI product have this kind of awareness, then we could sort of like addressing the risk or the problem from the source, rather than we figure out what would be patches, when these systems are being deployed to the world. Hope that answer that question. And I think there's other hands. Yeah.
Does the framework consider who the end user is, or whose privacy are we trying to protect? So let's say that I'm training a foundation model, and I have to implement guardrails that prevent, say, it leaking out, giving instructions about LSD or something.
Right.
But if it's actually used by if it's a privately hosted model and it's used by some researchers, but that giving out sensitive information or something would be preferable for them, or it giving some potential that some information that could potentially violate something would be beneficial for them.
Right.
So does the taxonomy inculcate this part? Like, who is the end user and whose privacy are we trying to preserve in the data set?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me repeat the question. So the question is, who are we building the privacy for, and how, let's say, as a practitioner, know who those people are? Does that sort of conclude that question? Right. So that's a good question. So I could answer from the taxonomy perspective, because we sort of grounded with the incident database, which already sort of centric around end user, right? So what I mean by end user is the user who are using these AI products or being affected by these AI products. So there's some sort of, if you want to think as a threat model, it's like around, what will be the attack surface for any individuals or general public being imposed by these AI products. But you're totally right. For a practitioner, I think there's like two things really hard. One is even try to understand the concept of privacy. And second thing is, even the concept of privacy, how can we actually apply to the product? Which is actually we'll be talking a little bit about in the third section of this talk. But to quickly put it here is that I think there's like two layers of the knowledge that we need to fill. One is at least there should be a baseline concept of these are the potential privacy risks that you're putting out there. And there should be a tool that helps them to bridge the gap in terms of applying these knowledges into the product. And when we talk about into the product, it should ideally cover the whole cycle, right? Not only just the processing, data collection, dissemination, but also when these things deploy to the world. But that's the challenging part, right? How can we help practitioners to even envision the potential harm?
Yeah, one more just follow-up question. So
Yeah.
you interviewed different people, and you showed that different people had different notions about privacy when all of them are developing the same product. So when it comes to developing an AI product, it's first designed by some people, the engineers implement it, the other, like, there's a different kind of people, and the interviews clearly revealed that all of them have a different sense, like what's privacy in my, like, the work which I do. But like, should we consider one person's perspective, or should the privacy goals be decided right before even doing everything?
Yeah.
Or like, what's your...
Yeah. So again, the question is, how does the privacy are discussed in the product team, and how should we, if we are tackling, let's say, helping practitioners to help them to think about privacy, how from what aspect, right? Is it the individual concept or as a group, right? So yeah, the interview study. So we actually did one. So most of our interview are individual. Because of logistics, right? It's really difficult to actually try to interview them. But there's actually one interview where actually interview as a group. So that we got lucky on that, right? The whole team actually on board. So we actually hop on with 4 or 5 practitioners. Two of them are designers, 2 of them are engineers, 1 of them are PM, if I remember correctly. I might need to double check with in a paper. But that's pretty interesting, as you mentioned, right? People have different mental model, or even they had, I wouldn't say disagreement, but different ideas of when these things should be discussed, right? It should be in the forefront, or it should be almost at the end, right? A common notion, at least in the industry, that we observe is that a lot of time privacy is sort of in the last mile of the product milestone, right? It's like, we're done all these. We just need a sign off, make sure that everything is compliant, and then we're good to go, right? But a lot of time, there's a challenges in terms of now the privacy of legal teams say, oh, you need to fix this, right? But that potentially could actually fundamentally change the premise of how they, let's say, collect the data or how they train the data, right? So there are some actually practitioners are aware of this notion already, and then actually argue that these things should be actually occur in the very first place in the product. So I will say, I think there are definitely practitioners that are aware of what is currently going on into the privacy practices. But the challenge is part of that is these things normally doesn't directly tie into, let's say, the regulation of policy in the company. So a lot of time they have to sort of contextualize and figure things out themselves. I think that's the challenging part. So the idea, or at least one of the vision in our research is that can we sort of propose, not saying a formula, but at least a design guideline of how these things should be discussed, or at least the best practices, right? And then ideally also fit into most of the company product workflow in AI products. Hope I answered your question.
Yeah, question. So I think you mentioned a wide array of AI privacy risks, and I think there are some existing tools like differential privacy, like tools like opacas, and then like different techniques to like make models forget like individual training data points and such. But those are like tools that have been built based on very well-defined problems and like privacy attacks. But like for some of the more vaguely defined problems you mentioned, like ethical use and deployment, as well as like the having like private data flows and such. Like, what's your vision on like tools in like these in this space will look like, and how do you incentivize AI practitioners to use them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is, what is our work fundamentally different from what we already seen in the privacy-preserving machine learning field, and how we envision to sort of incorporate that ideas into the actual practices of AI practitioner in the product, right? That's a good question. One of the fundamental differences I will say is, so this had to be shout out to my PhD advisor. He actually called this research as privacy through design. So that's sort of embedded some ideas that we have, right? We see privacy in the AI space as a design problem. We have to sort of tackling from when we start ideating AI products, we had to incorporate the AI mindset into the design of the product, right? So that you're totally right. I think the traditional or what we have seen in the privacy preserving machine learning fields, the tool will be super useful when you actually have a clear goal in terms of this is what we want to do in terms of product, right? And then they become a sort of mathematic proof that this is the solution to those problems. But in reality, a lot of challenges in the AI ideation phases, which a lot of HCI folks are looking into, is the ideation process of AI product is super messy. You can imagine that there's like a lot of ideas bouncing around. Oh, we want to use this, we want to create that. And sometimes AI just become a design components into it, but it's not the centric. Sometimes it's centric, but a lot of times it just be treated as a design components. So the question then become, so in these massive, creation process of AI product, can we at least step into envision what's the potential harm, right? And once we have sort of the ideal way is that once they have a vision for the products and they have some sense of what could be the potential privacy risk and what thing could go wrong, then these are the moment where these useful tool could come in, right? This is the privacy risk that you identify, and this is why we use that as a mitigation solution potentially to even reshape or being embedded into the product. So the ideal pipeline here is that a lot of privacy mindset should be incorporated into product ideation phases. And then we should also help the practitioner to sort of have access to the potential solution to mitigate the privacy risk they identify. Hope I answered your question. Cool. All right, so let's move on to the, go ahead.
So many widely used AI models and deployments nowadays, they're driven by the industry. Yes. So, but the industry, which is primarily profit-driven, and you just mentioned that we have to enhancing practitioners' awareness to address these privacy issues. But in a market that primarily focused on profit, practitioners often lack additional incentive to prioritize privacy. So, I think beyond the regulations and the user retention rate, or to say user experiences, what other strategies can we effectively motivate practitioners to take AI's privacy more seriously?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is, how can we actually encourage practitioners to actually do privacy work, given the fact that the whole market is profit-driven, and a lot of time privacy is sort of doing the opposite thing, right? That's a good question. I think that's the question a lot of researchers in the privacy security fields are essentially trying to answer, right? And before we may say that, policy making could be one promising direction, but we all know that policy making depends on who's in power, right? So depends on who's in charge and whether their tendency toward AI is. So that fluctuate, right? But I personally still feel like we have hope in terms of having more regulated territory in terms of how AI should be built. But just like the fact that AI is so new right now, just regulation couldn't really catch up. That's part of that. But I still feel like policy making should be a big role of that. And part of the reason why we centric around practitioner is also be sort of inspired by a lot of usable privacy security literature as well, is that even we all know that privacy and security behaviors or practices in the industry is sort of going beyond the minimum, but there are actually practitioners really want to do it. They just want to make things right? Because like, for example, we have participants that saying that they actually want to make sure that the product is actually doing the right thing, right? It's not just, we comply. It's just going beyond this is compliant. We actually want this product to be, imagine that you and your family member become one day become the end user of it. I still want to feel safe, or want to feel secure when using it, right? So I think there's still a potential that even though there's no specific requirement and regulation in terms of these practices, but we could encourage them to do so. And that's why we sort of also proposing that not only just the awareness, but also motivation in terms of these practices as well, in terms of using, in some way, social factor or social motivation to get them to act more on it. But at the end of the day, it's just we need the whole community to act upon together, right? There are definitely what we call the privacy and security champions, where they are fundamentally believe in these values and they want to also share this value to others. But at the end of the day, we can't expect everyone to jump on that same boat, right? Hope I answer your question. Yeah, it's a little bit mixer, but yeah. Okay, all right. So let's move on to the last part of this talk. So our work so far opened up the design space for supporting privacy work in AI. And coming back to the very first point I made in the talk, that practitioners have every incentives to incorporate AI into their products. So, and this trend will probably be most likely to continue to at least the next 5 to 10 years, right? So moving forward, the really practical question that we should ask or should envisioning is how to build a tool for practitioner to foreground privacy risk introduced by their AI product ideas. So to quickly recap, we now know that practitioners are ill-equipped for the privacy work and do not have tools to help mitigate AI-specific privacy threats. Rather, practitioners were required to use generic tools and methods. So the very first thing that we try to help practitioners with is to identify AI privacy risk with their new product concept. A lot of y'all also raised up in the question as well. And also to contextualize this to the SPAT framework that we talked about earlier, right? Without the awareness of the privacy risk, we can't expect to enhance practitioners' motivation or even ability to address those privacy risks in their products. So as a technology prop, we design and build a system called Privy. So before I go into details and show you how Privy actually works, these are sort of the goals that we want to achieve in Privy, right? We want Privy to help practitioners to articulate what their AI product does and needs. We want to help them to imagine use cases and surface associate beneficiaries associated with those use cases, and try to understand and identify privacy risk and surface associate impacted stakeholders. And finally, inform discussion and decision about privacy risk mitigations. So let's use a hypothetical product ideas for me to demonstrate what Privy works will look like. So imagine a company wants to build an AI-powered feature on social media platform that has access to users' contact information to allow one to dynamically specify audience groups of the post they want to include, right? And the hypothetical interface could look something like this, right? A user can type out the post and specify the audience constraints, right? Who you want to include, who do you want to exclude from this post? And they could use, for example, interface like this, use the plus symbol to target a specific audience, a group of audience, and use a minus to filtering. And also based on the user specific audience constraints, that the feature can then help you to categorize, based on your social network, who are the contacts included in these sets, right? And the user could then click on the audience category, generated by the feature and then see who actually are being included. This is a hypothetical feature, just get you thinking about it. And then I'm gonna demonstrate a workflow for Privy, right? So the first thing first, you just put in your product and the descriptions into Privy interface. And I'm gonna show the demo video. I just basically voice over what's happening here. Right, so first thing, yeah, as I mentioned, just put into the product information into it. And then the first thing that the Privy help you generate is basically a capability and requirement of the product, right? Essentially, what is the main utility and the requirement to unlock this utility. And once this being captured, the user then could move on to generate potential use cases of your product based on your capability and requirement. And a user we define as a way of what could a potential user of use cases will be a user could potentially use the product. And then the user could also get more suggestions to get some ideas what will be some intended as well as unintended use cases for the product, which again are being pre-generated by Privy, and they can navigate and select the one they think are relevant. And another way to interact with Privy is that, let's say I want to modify some content. The user could actually directly put in their feedback into the content. Let's say they want to be more specific about certain information of their use cases, let's say. And then they could just directly type in their natural language feedback and then get suggestion directly from Privy. And if they like the revision, they could directly apply back to the output of the system. The system also helped them to identify potential beneficiaries of the use cases, essentially who could potentially benefit from these use cases from the product, right? And then they could edit, remove, do anything they like for the system output as well. And finally, once they select the use cases they want to further explore, then they could move on to the next step in terms of identify the impacted stakeholders. So impacted stakeholders could be individuals or group of people that are being impacted from a lens of privacy by the product. And again, system generates some other ideas that the practitioner could bounce around and then select the one they think is relevant, they want to fully explore. And once they pick the impacted stakeholder they want to sort of like investigate into the privacy risk, they move on to the last steps where we list out all the privacy risk. And these privacy risks are based on the privacy taxonomy we just talked about, right? So it's like grounded by the definition and examples that we provided to the model. And then we also provide sort of more information about the taxonomy and each individual privacy risk as well as an education material on the side when they're navigating through this example. And again, everything sort of pre-generated could be modified, could be removed. We sort of want to create what we frame as AI-human teaming, I think, risk identification process, right? So like that gives you sort of the baseline, and the user could then modify upon that. Right. So this is what we call the AI privacy risk exploration phases, right? Where the idea here is that the practitioner give us the product descriptions, and then we generate a set of privacy risk as the output of that. And the next things I'm going to demonstrate to you is, well, imagine in a real product development process, let's say an individual engineers or designer went through this process and identified a couple of risks that think is relevant. They want to share with their colleagues or even talk to their manager. And a lot of time in the industry, they want one-pager summarization. So how can we do that in Privy? So this is sort of essentially what we try to build in the summary page. So first is the user could select the use cases they think is relevant to their product, and then hit on generate summary page button. And this is sort of the one-pager that summarize a lot of information about the product and also the privacy risk they identified through the exploration phases will be directly piped and streamlined into this page. As well as we show some privacy incidents and news article that we source from the database where we think that is relevant to their use cases and their product descriptions, right? So we do some sort of like word embedded to find a similarity there. And finally, once they agree with this summarization page, then the preview also help them to generate a unique URL that they could just share with their manager, for example, or their colleagues of the summary page they generated. So to recap, the input of a preview is the description of the product. The output of that is a list of privacy risks that is relevant to their product. All right, so previous and ongoing work actually. So we're in the process of doing another design iteration. So hopefully the next time you see this system will actually look a little bit different. And we still use this early phase preview as a technology prop to understand how to design a tool to support practitioner in identifying and forming discussion about potential privacy risk. And also to collect early signals of how preview might help practitioner in privacy work, right? So we conducted semi-structured interviews and hands-on testing session with 11 industry practitioners of different roles and again from different sizes of the companies. And here I'll share some of our high-level highlights. So overall, practitioners like Preview's product-specific privacy risk scanning workflow, with each preview feature playing a role in the workflow, such as identifying AI capability and requirements and privacy risk identification. And more broadly, they comment on AI teaming workflow I mentioned earlier, where they benefit from the human AI teaming risk identification process that they have and can never done before, right? And practitioners also share how previous feature helped them form privacy discussion decisions, such as a feature that allowed them to export and share privacy report. They also mentioned Preview enables a shift from a passive privacy review to an active one and make privacy work less like a black box that they had right now. And Preview also help them to potentially catch privacy risk early on and actually save some engineering resources. And finally, practitioners share thoughts on how Preview can be incorporated into various phases in the AI product lifecycle, ranging from product ideation, more ad hoc education materials, to even privacy reviews. All right, so to recap, through the early phase Preview, we demonstrate a possibility where a tool like Preview can support practitioners to identify privacy risk, inform discussion and mitigation strategies to the identified privacy risk. And finally, we'll be soon conducting another user study for Preview. So if you're practitioners, either in the industry or academia, and using AI in your products in any capacity, and you're interested in using Preview or testing Preview, we'd love to talk to you. You can leave your contact information by scanning the QR code here. That will lead you to a Google form, and our research team will follow up with you. And with that, thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take any other questions.
You mentioned about the Privy tool, outlining some of the features that can help the privacy assist or like the practitioners work it out. But does it also show like the mitigations and what is the basis of giving those recommendations, like the frameworks and all that? Does it also help the practitioners understand where that suggestions are coming from?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is how the Preview right now provide suggestion for mitigation, right? The short answer is right now we don't really have any fancy ways of doing that. There's a couple hypotheses that we have for Preview. One is by showing the information, we raise the awareness, and that sort of correlate the awareness of knowing that this is the privacy risk they need to address, and that will go back to their own ability of mitigation. So there's a couple things to mention here as well. Mitigation is context dependence, depends on what role you're in, what product you're working on, and which company you're working on, right? So different company will have different strategies in terms of mitigating. So that's context dependent. So there's one hypothesis could be by raising the awareness to practitioners, they could use their own knowledge in terms of how this should be addressed in their working context. That's one. Second is Preview could potentially go into direction which we haven't implemented yet, is that we could still provide some provocative actionable items or questions for practitioners to reflect on. So this is the privacy risk that Preview and you collaboratively identify. And this could be the questions that you could ask, for example, in order to address the surveillance risk that you also agree is high risk for your product. How can you do about it in terms of your capability or requirement of your product? And what's more importantly, potentially, is how could that potentially impact to the utility of that, and how you could make the trade-off, right? Do you want to just directly modify into the way that this product had no surveillance risk at all, or you want to try to sort of like find a middle ground where you could accept that there are some type of risk involved, and that is the trade-off that you made for the utility. Because at the end of the day, I think in the reality is that essentially there's a trade-off, right? And this is unreasonable to even ask practitioners to say, you should build AI systems that have no privacy risk, which means that we probably just don't use AI, maybe? I don't know. But yeah, I think that the reality here is that essentially we want them to do the well-informed decision about their privacy work. I think that's at least the goal for now.
Quick question, which tools and frameworks do you guys use to build Privy? Because the UI is very nice.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So it's a big mixture of a framework called Reactflow, and also I use a lot of material UI components. Yeah, and my sort of design also hugely inspired by one of the Kai paper from last year called Farsight. So if in case any folks read that paper, you could see the shadow of that. Yeah, but we actually use Farsight as one of the strategy I'm using here is that using Farsight as a design baseline and try to test it out whether these workflow they propose, which Farsight is trying to tackle more generally responsible AI risk. And I try to contextualize into more privacy specific and use that as an early phase design, right? And then we test it out in the form of the study and realize that, oh, we actually need some changes for that workflow.
We actually have a question on Zoom. Jonathan, would you like to unmute?
Sure, thanks. This is awesome, by the way. Thank you, Hank. I just had a quick question. So those taxonomies, like the first one that you talked about, are super helpful for practitioners. And I know you had like a recent research paper published around kind of reduction in cognitive faculties that comes with using AI with some Microsoft folks.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that in your taxonomy, and I'm like, maybe that fits into like the intrusion category, but like maybe not. So like my general question is like, are you discovering through your research any new threats or treatments? And like, how might those fit into a taxonomy that practitioners could use?
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up, though. Yeah, so one of my recent work, it's really hard to say I got viral, but it's actually got viral. But it's for a different topic. But yeah, but a lot of interest when looking into this space is definitely I'm so excited in terms of seeing this amazing AI products being created and being used in this scale. But essentially we want, as a privacy and security researcher at heart, I still really want to understand what could be a downstream impact of that, right? So I think there are definitely, so going back to your question, I think there's definitely a lot of work around that. Can we essentially create a framework of what are the risks essentially for this technology, right? In my opinion, I think it's probably still too early to say that there's one framework capturing that. So that's why I think context matter, and that is also one of the strategies that we're using when we're building this taxonomy specifically for privacy, and also we really want to ground it with the reality, right? So that's something that we always try to emphasize, that it's not speculation, it's not AI snake oil, right? We're not trying to tackle the future 100 years of the privacy, AI privacy, which is like focusing on right now, but at the same time, we want to propose a practical solution of this is the current state of the world, but this could also apply to the incidents that will occur in the future. But it is also a fair argument that when things occur, it's already too late. I'm not saying that we're doing sort of the predicting the future things. Yeah, that's definitely a limitation I agree upon. So going back to, I think I'll track again, but I think both two type of work is important, right? Try to like envisioning what could be potential harm, even that is not occurring yet. But at the same time, at least when I'm talking to practitioner, they really want to know, so what are the things that we could actually do right now? And then I could also persuade my manager that this is important. So this is why we come up with that. Yeah, maybe focusing on what happening in the real world, and then potentially using those as evidence for them as a fight power to like why privacy is even matter for their products. Sorry, I say a lot, but hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yep.
My question is, can you give an example of what are the difficulties of current privacy risk assessment tools faces when we're trying to use them to address the privacy issues arisen by AI?
Right. So the question is, what is the current challenges for the current tools
Yeah.
of identifying and mitigating the risk, right?
Yes.
That's a good question. So a lot of tools that, so again, that will be depending on what company or role that you're in the company. I'm talking specific for practitioner, right? A lot of materials that at least we heard of, or and even during the interview study, they were sort of describing the artifacts, but for obvious reason, they can't directly share those tools or even templates for us, right? But a lot of time, what we're seeing is a lot of time is through something like a checklist or a template or the form that had to go through. If you went through a process called IRB, I'm not sure if you're aware of that. Yeah, it's similar to the IRB process that we did at school, but a lot of time those assessment in the company will be more centric around product itself and as well as potential downstream harm for the impact of the user, for the business and all that, right? It's different, it's slightly different, but you could probably use that as an analogy of what is the current tool. And one of the challenges they face is that a lot of time they had to do it themselves, and then they had to go through a review process. And it's typically a yes or no at the end as an outcome. And if they're yes, fine, this is what product team want. If it's a no, there's some of the practices that we heard more commonly is there will be one dedicated person. It's like, hey, you're responsible for this. Help, figure it out. And we need a green light for this, right? That's one of the common practices that we heard. But there could also be sort of organic discussion among the product team. There are sometimes, for example, more experienced employee in the team that say that, oh, this is how we handled it before. We had similar resources before, things like that, right? But in some way, there are some knowledge around in the team, but not so explicitly, if that makes sense to you. But what is explicit is that there are some regulation, process, policy that have to go through. But how that was done depends on the team and the roles. Yeah.
So just want to ask if, based on the name itself, the AI privacy risk system name itself, is it also powered by AI?
It is also powered by AI.
Okay. So I know there's this saying we need to use AI to defeat AI. But if this tool is also powered by AI, then it also has all the issues addressed in the first section of this talk. So basically, how are you going to address that? And basically, how are you going to push this idea to practitioners if they have this kind of issues?
Yeah, that's a valid question. So the question is, the fact that we're also using AI to address AI risk, would that be, I don't know, using magic to defeat magic, right? In some way. But yeah, that's a real that's a legit question, right? I guess I also encounter that question in the future for the system as well. But there's two things I could tackle. I could answer. One is we're definitely not in the position saying that, hey, the whole industry shouldn't do AI product or research anymore, right? This is definitely not our position. In fact, it's probably the opposite of that. I still really embrace what the values of AI bring us. But I think the important thing is that you should know why you're using AI and what's the pros and cons essentially, right? One example, if you still remember, one of the slides is that we're now seeing a lot of product that basically says that the reason why there's AI in the product is because they need an AI product so that they can market it, or whatever that is, right? I think that's definitely not the position or the trend that we want the whole industry to move forward. But at the same time, if you really know that what's the benefits of incorporating AI into the system, in my case, in Privy, my argument will be AI has known, or at least generative AI has known to enhance people's creativity when you actually know what you're doing, right? It's like a system of happy to do brainstorming. And that's why we also frame Privy as sort of situating into a more early phase product when you have the ideas of the product or the concept of the product. And I think that's where Privy could be the most helpful in a way that help you to think about use cases and how that lead to potential privacy downstream risk, right? And also one of the things that we incorporate AI is that help you to contextualize the definition of our privacy risk into your product cases, right? I think that's also one thing that Gen AI have been proven that is pretty helpful in some way. But at the end of the day, we want practitioners to be empowered in this process, and that they should be definitely the final call in terms of what privacy risks actually matter, and this is why we choose a mitigation strategy called that. Yeah. Good questions. Yep.
So you kind of discussed how maybe a future rendition where it's available to maybe less technical roles, or maybe even on the more like legal and policy aspects?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is, can we potentially expand the scope of the work to be beyond practitioners, not only just not just practitioner, but potentially other stakeholders like policymakers and the general public, essentially, right? That's a good question. So again, there's like different ideas I had. So this is actually not something I think of frequently, but one analogy I could think of right now is in the responsible AI or human-centered AI field, I should say. There is a lot of work around like auditing, like public auditing, right? How can we sort of loop the general public or potential impacted users of the AI system, let's say, into the auditing cycle of the product, and potentially also looping in those comments and feedback back to the product, right? I think that could be one way to go. But obviously, the question and challenges around that is who should be responsible of working those stuff and maintaining those tools, right? Something I could talk more in terms of more contextualizing to my work, though, is something we're thinking about of extension of preview is that sort of along the line is, so now we're centric around practitioner, and we also know that actually practitioner care about their users, right? Can we find a way to, now this is the identified risk. Can you loop in your user or potential user and help you to figure out what would be the best configuration of the trade-off between utility and privacy? That's more on a high level, but I think that's closer to what you're talking about, is that can this research go beyond not just a practitioner, but also other stakeholders as well? Yeah.
Briefly adding on, I was just curious for that, like the slide 6, I think that was like the survey that you did initially. So like 49% of those like participants like kind of like had awareness towards like the privacy risks for AI. And I was wondering if that 49% is just for practitioners or also like including the general.
Oh yeah, that survey is actually conducted by Google. So that's not yeah, that's also a really nice paper, right? So they primarily, if I remember correctly, they primarily asked general public, not specific toward industry folks or who are building AI. I guess there are also some people in the survey who are also working on AI, right? But that is a really large scale survey. I think they did like over 10,000 people across the world. So that's an impressive number.